At 2300 hours on December 18, 1941, Lieutenant Luigi Durand de la Penne crouched in the forward compartment of a human torpedo, watching the lights of Alexandria harbor grow brighter. The torpedo was 22 feet long, battery-powered, maximum speed 3 knots. 2 men rode it like a motorcycle. De la Penne sat in front, controlling navigation. Emilio Bianchi sat behind, managing the detachable warhead. The warhead contained 600 pounds of explosive, enough to sink a battleship, if they could get close enough, if they could survive long enough, if the plan actually worked. Ahead in the darkness sat HMS Valiant and HMS Queen Elizabeth, 2 British battleships, combined displacement 64,000 tons, combined firepower 16 15-inch guns. The battleships were the backbone of Britain's Mediterranean fleet. They controlled the sea lanes to North Africa. They protected Allied convoys. They threatened Axis supply lines. If those ships died, the Mediterranean would belong to Italy and Germany. Churchill had called them unsinkable. Tonight, 5 Italian commandos would prove him wrong. If you want to see how this impossible mission turned out, please hit that like button. Every like helps this story reach more viewers. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Back to De La Penne. The Italian Navy had a problem. Britain controlled the Mediterranean. British battleships were faster, better armed, and more numerous than Italian battleships. Direct naval engagement favored the British. Italy could not win a conventional surface battle, so Italy would fight unconventionally. The 10th Light Flotilla was formed in March 1941. The unit's mission was simple: attack ships in harbors using unconventional weapons, human torpedoes, limpet mines, underwater demolition. The men were volunteers. The missions were suicide. The results would change the war. The human torpedo was designated SLC, Siluro a lenta corsa, slow-running torpedo. The Italians called it the maiale, the pig. The nickname was accurate. The device was slow, ungainly, and difficult to control, but it worked. The torpedo could carry 2 men and a detachable warhead into enemy harbors. The men would navigate underwater using compass and depth gauge. They would attach the warhead to a target ship's hull, set the timer, abandon the torpedo, swim to shore, escape if possible, die if necessary. Training took 6 months. The Commandos learned underwater navigation in complete darkness, learned to breathe from closed-circuit rebreathers that produced no bubbles, learned to attach warheads to ship hulls while fighting cold water, fatigue, and nitrogen narcosis, learned to accept that most missions would end in death or capture. The survival rate for 10th Light Flotilla operations was approximately 30%. 7 out of 10 men would not return. Everyone volunteered anyway. Luigi Durand de la Penne was 26 years old, Naval Academy graduate, submarine officer. He had volunteered for the 10th Light Flotilla in May 1941. He had participated in 2 previous operations against Alexandria. Both failed. The first mission in September 1941 had been aborted when the submarine carrying the human torpedoes was detected. The second mission in October had failed when De La Penne's torpedo malfunctioned 3 miles from the harbor. He had swum back to the submarine, 9 hours in the water, nearly died from hypothermia. But he survived. He volunteered for the 3rd attempt. The 3rd attack was planned for December 1941. 3 human torpedoes would attack Alexandria Harbor. 6 men total. Target list: HMS Valiant, HMS Queen Elizabeth, and any aircraft carriers present. The mission had one advantage. British security at Alexandria was poor. The harbor defenses consisted of anti-submarine nets, shore patrols, and searchlights. No sonar, no depth charges in the harbor basin, no systematic underwater patrol. The British assumed the harbor was too well defended for attack. The Italians would exploit that assumption. The submarine Scirè departed La Spezia, Italy on December 3, 1941. The submarine carried 3 human torpedoes in sealed cylinders attached to the hull. The crew consisted of 48 men, plus 6 commandos from the 10th Light Flotilla, Della Penne and Bianchi on the first torpedo, Captain Antonio Marseglia and Petty Officer Spartaco Scergat on the second, Captain Vincenzo Martellotta and Petty Officer Mario Marino on the third. 6 men, 3 torpedoes, 1 target. Either they would sink Britain's Mediterranean fleet or die trying. Scirè reached Alexandria on December 18th. The submarine surfaced 1.3 miles from the harbor entrance at 1840. The Commandos suited up, waterproof suits, closed-circuit rebreathers, compass, depth gauge, wire cutters, minimal equipment, maximum mobility. The human torpedoes were flooded out of their cylinders and released. The 3 crews mounted their machines. Della Penne checked his compass. The bearing to the harbor entrance was 285 degrees, distance approximately 7,000 feet. Travel time at 3 knots, 45 minutes. He signaled the other crews. They submerged. Underwater navigation in darkness is disorienting. No visual references, no landmarks, only compass, depth gauge, and hope. Della Penne maintained a depth of 15 feet, deep enough to avoid detection, shallow enough to see surface lights for navigation. The torpedo moved slowly. 3 knots felt like walking speed. The battery would last approximately 6 hours, enough for the mission. Probably, if nothing went wrong. At 20:15, Della Penne reached the harbor entrance. The anti-submarine nets were closed, standard procedure after dark. The nets extended 30 feet below the surface, steel cables in a mesh pattern, designed to stop submarines. The nets would stop human torpedoes too, unless the Commandos could find a way through. Della Penne surfaced to 5 feet depth, searched for gaps in the net, found none. He would have to wait. At 20:30, 3 British destroyers approached the harbor entrance from seaward, returning from patrol. The anti-submarine nets would open to allow the destroyers to enter. That was the opportunity. Della Penne positioned his torpedo behind the last destroyer. When the nets opened, the destroyers would enter. Della Penne would follow in their wake, riding the disturbance, using the destroyer's noise to mask his approach. Risky, but the only option. The nets opened at 20:42. The destroyers entered. Della Penne followed 50 yards behind the last ship. His torpedo was submerged to 12 feet, deep enough to avoid visual detection, shallow enough to follow the destroyer's wake. The gate operators did not notice the small disturbance behind the destroyers. The nets closed at 20:48. Della Penne was inside Alexandria Harbor. The other 2 crews followed using the same method. All 3 human torpedoes were now inside Britain's most secure naval base. Della Penne navigated toward the battleship anchorage. HMS Valiant was moored 1,200 yards from the harbor entrance. HMS Queen Elizabeth was moored 300 yards beyond Valiant. The 2 battleships sat in line. Della Penne's target was Valiant. Marseglia would attack Queen Elizabeth. Martellotta would attack whatever target he could reach. The plan was flexible. Survival was unlikely. Success was possible. At 21:30, Della Penne reached HMS Valiant. The battleship was enormous, 646 feet long, 33,000 tons, 8 15-inch guns. The hull rose like a cliff above the small torpedo. Della Penne circled to the port side, away from the dock, away from shore lights. He would place the warhead on the port side beneath the forward magazines. Maximum damage, maximum casualties. He dove to 30 feet and approached the hull. Then the torpedo malfunctioned. The depth control failed. The torpedo began sinking. Della Penne fought the controls. The torpedo continued descending. 40 feet, 50 feet, 60 feet. The harbor bottom was 65 feet. The torpedo hit bottom with a soft thud. De la Penne tried to restart the motor. Nothing. The torpedo was dead. He was 60 feet underwater, in complete darkness, beneath a British battleship, with 600 pounds of explosive and a malfunctioning machine. De la Penne made a decision. He would detach the warhead manually, carry it to the target position, place it by hand. The warhead weighed 600 pounds. Underwater, the weight was reduced by buoyancy, but 600 pounds was still 600 pounds. De la Penne released the warhead from the torpedo. He grabbed the lifting handles. He pulled. The warhead moved. Slowly, he dragged it across the harbor bottom toward Valiant's hull. The distance was 40 feet. De la Penne dragged the warhead 5 feet at a time. Pull, rest, breathe, pull again. His rebreather was functioning, but oxygen was limited. The carbon dioxide scrubber would last approximately 4 hours. He had been underwater for 3 hours already. He was running out of time. He kept pulling. 30 feet to go. 25 feet. 20 feet. Bianchi was helping from above, swimming down, helping drag, swimming up for air, repeating. The two men worked in darkness, only touch to guide them, only determination to sustain them. At 23:15, they reached the hull. De la Penne positioned the warhead directly beneath the forward magazine. He set the timer. 90 minutes. The warhead would detonate at 00:45 on December 19th. Valiant would sink at anchor. The crew would have no warning, no chance to respond, no opportunity to prevent the explosion. De la Penne and Bianchi surfaced at 23:30. They swam toward the harbor exit. The plan was to swim underwater to a position near the anti-submarine nets. Wait until a ship entered or exited. Slip through when the nets opened, escape to the rendezvous point 3 miles offshore, meet the submarine, return to Italy. Simple. Except nothing was simple. At 23:45, a British patrol boat spotted something in the water. Searchlights swept the area. The lights caught De la Penne swimming on the surface. He dove, too late. The patrol boat closed. Sailors threw grenades into the water. The grenades exploded around De la Penne. The shock waves stunned him. He surfaced, gasping. The British pulled him from the water. Bianchi was captured 10 minutes later. Both men were alive. Both were prisoners. The warhead was still ticking. British intelligence interrogated De la Penne immediately. They asked where he came from. He refused to answer. They asked what he was doing in the harbor. He refused to answer. They asked if there were explosives. He refused to answer. The interrogation continued for 30 minutes. De la Penne said nothing. The British were frustrated but not alarmed. One swimmer in the harbor did not constitute a major threat. They locked De la Penne and Bianchi in a storage room and posted guards. At 00:15, the British moved the prisoners. The new holding location was HMS Valiant. The storage room was in the forward section, directly above the magazines, directly above the warhead De la Penne had placed 90 minutes earlier. The warhead would detonate in 30 minutes. De la Penne would die with the British crew. He had not planned on that, but it was fitting. An Italian commando dying on the British battleship he had just destroyed. De la Penne made a decision. He requested to speak to Valiant's captain. The request was denied. He insisted. The guards refused. At 00:30, De la Penne told the guards that an explosion would occur in 15 minutes. They did not believe him. He insisted. They called an officer. The officer questioned De la Penne. De la Penne repeated his warning. Explosion in 15 minutes. Location beneath the forward magazines. The officer ordered an evacuation. Valiant's crew began evacuating at 00:35. Sailors poured out of hatches. Officers shouted orders. Searchlights illuminated the water. Divers were sent down to search the hull. They found nothing. The water was too dark. The warhead was too well hidden. The divers surfaced and reported no explosives found. The captain did not know whether to believe de la Penne or order the crew back aboard. He chose to keep the crew evacuated, just in case. At 0045, the warhead detonated. The explosion created a massive underwater bubble beneath Valiant's hull. The bubble expanded upward. The force lifted 33,000 tons of battleship 6 feet out of the water. The ship dropped back down. The impact shattered hull plates. Water poured into the forward compartments. The magazines flooded. The ship took a 5-degree list. Damage control teams rushed to seal the flooding. Too late. Valiant settled onto the harbor bottom. The ship did not sink completely. The shallow water prevented total submersion. But the battleship was finished. Out of the war for months, possibly years. 4 minutes later at 0049, a second explosion rocked Alexandria Harbor, HMS Queen Elizabeth. Marseille and Shergat had successfully placed their warhead. Queen Elizabeth suffered the same fate as Valiant, lifted by the explosion, dropped back down, settled onto the harbor bottom. Both battleships were technically still afloat. Both were completely disabled. Britain's Mediterranean fleet had just lost its 2 most powerful ships to 6 men with 3 torpedoes. The third torpedo attacked a different target. Martellotta and Marino had found the British tanker Sagona and the destroyer HMS Jervis moored side by side. They placed their warhead between the 2 ships. The explosion at 0047 destroyed the tanker and severely damaged the destroyer. 3 warheads, 3 successful attacks. 6 men had crippled Britain's Mediterranean naval power in one night. All 6 Italian commandos were captured. De la Penne and Bianchi were already prisoners when their warhead detonated. Marseille and Shergat were captured after Queen Elizabeth exploded. They had tried to swim to shore. British patrol boats caught them before they reached the harbor exit. Martellotta and Marino were captured after the tanker explosion. They had almost escaped, almost made it through the anti-submarine nets. A searchlight found them 50 yards from freedom. The British were stunned. 2 battleships disabled, 1 tanker destroyed, 1 destroyer damaged. The attackers were 6 men in wetsuits riding battery-powered torpedoes. The attack had been invisible until the explosions. No warning, no detection, no chance to respond. The Italian commandos had walked into the most heavily defended harbor in the Mediterranean and destroyed Britain's naval superiority in 3 hours. Churchill ordered a news blackout. The British people could not know that their unsinkable battleships had been sunk in their own harbor. The Germans and Italians could not know how successful the attack had been. British authorities kept Valiant and Queen Elizabeth in their normal anchorage positions. Crews remained visible on deck. Flags continued flying. From the air, the battleships looked operational. From intelligence reports, the ships appeared ready for combat. The deception worked. Axis commanders did not realize how badly the British Mediterranean fleet had been crippled. The strategic impact was enormous. With Valiant and Queen Elizabeth disabled, Britain could not control the central Mediterranean. Italian convoys could supply North Africa with minimal interference. Rommel's Africa Corps received reinforcements and equipment. The Desert War turned in Germany's favor. British forces in North Africa faced better supplied German troops. The entire campaign was affected by 6 men and 3 torpedoes attacking one night in December. The 6 Italian commandos became prisoners of war. They were held in Egypt for 6 months, then transferred to a POW camp in India, then to Kenya. The British did not repatriate them until 1944. 3 years as prisoners, 3 years away from the war, but they survived. All 6 men survived. The 10th Light Flotilla's survival rate was 30%. These 6 men beat the odds. Della Penne returned to Italy in 1944. The war had turned against Italy. Mussolini had fallen. Italy had switched sides. Della Penne joined the Italian co-belligerent navy fighting alongside the Allies. He cleared mines from Italian harbors. He trained Italian frogmen in underwater demolition. He continued serving until the war ended. After the war, Della Penne remained in the Italian Navy. He rose to the rank of admiral. He served until retirement in 1966. In 1945, Britain awarded Della Penne the Distinguished Service Order. The British recognized the Alexandria raid as one of the most successful special operations of World War II. The attack had been audacious, professional, effective. Della Penne had warned the British about the explosion, saved lives, conducted himself honorably as a prisoner. The British respected that. The medal ceremony occurred in London. Della Penne wore his Italian Navy uniform. British officers saluted, former enemies honoring courage. HMS Valiant was repaired and returned to service in 1943. The damage took 18 months to fix. The battleship missed critical battles in 1942, missed the North African campaign's crucial period, missed Malta convoys, missed opportunities to engage Italian and German forces. When Valiant finally returned to combat, the strategic situation had changed. The Allies had regained naval superiority. Valiant was no longer essential. The ship served through the war's end, but never again as a decisive weapon. HMS Queen Elizabeth suffered similar fate. Repaired in 1943, returned to service, missed critical battles. By the time the battleship was operational, the Mediterranean was largely under Allied control. Queen Elizabeth served in the Indian Ocean, bombarded Japanese positions, supported amphibious operations, but the ship never recovered its strategic importance. The Alexandria raid had removed Queen Elizabeth from the war during the period when the ship mattered most. The 10th Light Flotilla continued operations throughout the war. Additional raids on Gibraltar, attacks on Allied shipping in the Mediterranean, mining operations, underwater demolition. The unit conducted 15 major operations between 1941 and 1943. Success rate was approximately 60%. Casualty rate was 70%. The men who served in the 10th Light Flotilla understood the mathematics. Most would die. Some would succeed. All would serve. Modern Special Operations Forces study the Alexandria raid. The operation demonstrates principles that remain relevant. Unconventional tactics can defeat superior forces. Small units can achieve strategic effects. Courage and skill can overcome technological disadvantage. The 6 Italian Commandos had no advanced technology, no sophisticated equipment, just human torpedoes, basic diving gear, and exceptional training. They defeated British security, penetrated a heavily defended harbor, sank 2 battleships, changed the course of the Mediterranean War. The human torpedo concept influenced post-war development. British, American, and Soviet special forces adopted similar systems. Underwater delivery vehicles became standard special operations equipment. Modern SEAL delivery vehicles trace their lineage to the Italian Maial. The technology improved, speed increased, navigation became electronic. But the fundamental concept remained. Small teams, underwater approach, explosive charges, high-risk missions. The raid on Alexandria demonstrated that no ship is unsinkable, no harbor is impenetrable, no defense is perfect. The British had assumed their battleships were safe in Alexandria. The harbor had anti-submarine nets, shore patrols, searchlights, standard security measures. Not enough. The Italians found weaknesses, exploited timing, used the destroyer's entry to penetrate the nets, navigated in darkness to avoid detection, placed warheads with precision. The operation succeeded because the attackers understood that security depends on assumptions. Break the assumptions and security fails. De La Penne died in 1992 at age 77. He had lived 50 years after the Alexandria raid, served his country in war and peace, received honors from both Italy and Britain, trained generations of Italian naval officers, became a symbol of courage and professionalism. His obituaries in Italian newspapers described him as a national hero. British naval publications called him one of the most effective special operations commanders of World War II. Former enemies agreed. De La Penne had been a warrior, honorable, brave, effective. The other 5 commandos lived quieter lives. Bianchi returned to civilian work after the war, became an engineer, rarely discussed the raid. Marseglia remained in the Navy, retired as a captain. Shergat worked in shipping. Martellotta became a teacher. Marino worked in manufacturing. None sought publicity. None wrote memoirs. They had done their duty, served their country, survived. That was enough. The Alexandria raid remains one of the most successful special operations in military history. 6 men, 3 human torpedoes. 1 night, 2 battleships disabled, 1 tanker destroyed, 1 destroyer damaged. British Mediterranean naval superiority eliminated. Strategic balance shifted. North African campaign affected. All accomplished without firing a shot, without killing a single enemy sailor unnecessarily. The Commandos had warned the British before the explosions, given crews time to evacuate, minimized casualties while maximizing damage. Professional soldiers conducting war professionally. Modern Italy honors the 10th Light Flotilla. A museum in La Spezia displays human torpedoes and equipment. Photographs of the Commandos line the walls. De La Penne's medals are on display. The Italian Navy maintains the tradition. Special Forces units train in underwater operations. Carry the legacy forward. Remember that 6 men once changed a war with courage and a few hundred pounds of explosive. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We are rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about commandos who walked into harbors and sank unsinkable ships. Real people, real courage, real missions that changed history. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you are watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia? Our community stretches across the entire world. You are not just a viewer. You are part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you are here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure these commandos do not disappear into silence. These men proved that courage and skill can defeat any defense, and you are helping make sure their story is remembered.